Radha Krishna Foundation presents Samarpan, an offering of service.
वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की जय। सद्गुरु महाराज की जय। विघ्न हरन गौरी के नंदन सुमिर सदा सुखदाई रे। तुलसीदास जो गणपति सुमिरे कोटि विघ्न टल जाई रे। वेद पुराण कथा से पहले जो सुमरे सुखदाई रे। अष्ट सिद्धि नौ निधि लक्ष्मी मन इच्छा फलदाई रे। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। 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 सिद्धि विनायक मोरिया गिरजानंदन मोरिया। सिद्धि विनायक मोरिया गिरजानंदन मोरिया। सिद्धि विनायक मोरिया गिरजानंदन मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। एक दंत जय मोरिया गौरी सुत जय 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 मोरिया। जय लंबोदर मोरिया अग्रदेव जय मोरिया। जय लंबोदर मोरिया अग्रदेव जय मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। एक दंत जय मोरिया गौरी सुत जय मोरिया। एक दंत जय मोरिया गौरी सुत जय मोरिया। जय लंबोदर मोरिया अग्रदेव जय मोरिया। जय लंबोदर मोरिया अग्रदेव जय मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। गणपति बाप्पा मोरिया मंगल मूर्ति मोरिया। Hindus, we rely greatly upon our scriptures for information and guidance to live a proper and a meaningful life. However, we may not necessarily understand the nature, the depth, nor the comprehensiveness of these scriptures. So today let's spend the next few minutes in reviewing our scriptures, how they're derived, and whether they conform or contradict each other. Hindu scriptures overall are called Shastram. Now this word Shastram, Shas means to teach or to command. Tra or Trayate means to save. So the Shastras are meant to command human beings in the initial stages of life, while we accept the teachings and practices recommended. Then they provide enlightenment, which by virtue saves us from all human problems in the later stages of life. Adi Shankaracharya compares the scriptures to a mother. the mother commands in the beginning, even when the child does not understand the significance or the commandments. For example, the mother says, "Do not eat mud. It's not good for you." The child does not understand why he should not eat mud, he or she should not eat mud, but will obey the mother, and so the child is protected from the harm of eating mud. Similarly, the rishis and the saints interpret the scriptures and offer recommendations in the form of doctrine for us to follow. And if we follow, we too will be protected. So like the mother and child, at the initial stages of life, command is used. And similarly, in the initial stages of our spiritual journey, we must be open to be commanded and willing to obey the advice and guidance of the scriptures. As a child grows up, he starts understanding more about life, and so threats like the harm of eating mud is removed and replaced with teachings and ultimately knowledge. Similarly, if we start living on the path recommended by our scriptures, then we too shall gain true knowledge, which ultimately is responsible for our happiness, here in this life and the hereafter. So now let's look at the different types of scriptures available to us in Hinduism. Firstly, there's the Vedas. Vedas is known to be in the category of Shruti, from the root verb shrut, that which is heard. Ved says, Nishvasitamasya Vedaha, that Ved has come from the breath of God. So Bhagavan revealed the Vedas first in the heart of Brahma, then the Vedas are revealed to humanity through the rishis who were intermediaries, so to speak. So we can say that God transmits and the rishis receive. In fact, the airwaves are always present. The reason why we cannot receive these transmissions is because the average mind is not equipped like that of the rishis. Scriptures are written in something called Parokshavad. So the Vedas remain for a long time in what is called Shabdarup, which means they are transmitted verbally in its fixed form, not scripted or written in book form. Because the Vedas come from the breath of God, they're also called Apaurusheya Praman. In other words, the Veda was not born of the human intellect or touched by human hands. Vedic literature, or the Vedas, comes from the root verb vid, which means to know. And of course, it's a treasure house of knowledge. But 5,000 years ago, they were put into book form and divided into 4 parts by Vedvyas, who's not only a rishi, but Bhagavan's avatar himself. These 4 parts are known by their popular names: Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda. And like I said, Vedvyas is not just a rishi, but a proof of the great personality. He is written in Bhagavad Mahapuran. Tata saptadashe jatah satyavatyang parasharat. This is Bhagavad Mahapuran, the 1st canto, 3rd chapter, 21st verse. Here we learn that Vedvyas, according to Bhagavad Mahapuran, is the 17th of the 24 avatars of Bhagavan. Now let's take a brief look at these 4 components of the Vedas. The Rig Veda, firstly, is composed of what are called Rig mantras, meaning metrical compositions and poetic compositions. Yajurveda is composed of mantras in prose, meaning in ordinary form. Samaveda is composed of mantras that are in musical form. And Atharvaveda is composed with the assistance of a Atharva Rishi. For clarification, however, we hear this word mantra. If we watch modern television today, it's used very loosely in the West these days. But the word mantra is used only for Vedic composition. From the word mantra, man, which means that which is for inquiry, that which is for analysis and understanding. And tra or trayate, which means to protect, like trahimam. And so mantra meant to enlighten and to protect the human being. And because of that recitation of these mantras, which is called, in bhakti, it is called kirtan bhakti, which is, of course, a form of worship. But if this is done correctly, not only would it be worship, but it would improve our knowledge. That will result in spiritual growth and ultimately protection for us using these mantras. So as we can see, mantras are capable of helping us in a variety of different ways, once used in accordance to the recommendations of our scriptures. So to recap here, what we have discussed so far, we can agree that the Vedas are the foremost of all scriptures. That is why Hindus belong to what is called Vedic Sampradaya, meaning Vedic tradition. In fact, the correct name for people of Vedic tradition is Vaidikas. But we're loosely called, Hindus, which is a name given to us by someone else. This is a topic that we can discuss at another time. Now, in addition to the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sam and Atharva Veda, they are the Vedangas. These are associated scriptures composed to help in the understanding of Vedic knowledge. The Vedangas are 6 in number. The first one is called Shiksha, which are rules for enunciating Vedic mantras. Then there's Kalpa, which are rules for performing Vedic rituals. There's Vyakaran, which provides the grammatical rules for the Vedas. And then there's Nirukti, which is a dictionary of the Vedas. There's Chand, which provides knowledge of the musical scales in which mantras need to be sung. And then the one most of us know is Jyotish, which is an astrological text that is designed to help us find auspicious and inauspicious times for different occasions, etc. Then comes the Upaveda. Upavedas are texts that contain material or worldly knowledge that are necessary for us to know in order to implement the spiritual knowledge of the Vedas. These are 4 in number. The first one is Arthaved. Arthaved, which is the Upaved of Rigved and deals with economic science. There's Dhanurved, which is from Yajurved and deals with military science. As a matter of fact, it is said that Hitler's people stole copies of this scripture and took them to Germany, and that is where they got the swastika from. Even though they inverted a little bit. Then there's Gandharva Ved, which is from Samaved, and this deals with musical science. It is also said that this is where music has originated from. And a more familiar one all over the world today is Ayurveda, which is the Upaved of Atharva Ved and deals with medical science. Moving on, following the Upavedas comes the Upanishads. These are the knowledge section of the Vedas, and as we know, Upanishads are 108 in number. As a derivative of the Vedas, Upanishads are also under the category of Shruti. The knowledge of the Upanishads is so valuable that even the 19th century German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer said that in the whole world there's no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life, and it shall be the solace of my death. After the Upanishads, we have what are called the Sutras. The Sutras are literature in the form of aphorisms and cryptic statements elaborating on the ideas from the Ved in capsule form. In other words, they are classifications of nutshell statements or topics from the Ved in order to afford us better understanding. Many scholars have noted that Vedic topics, being so massive in magnitude, are difficult to reconcile. As such, the sutras arrange them into topic form or topic-wise. For example, the most popular among the sutras is from the Vedanta Darshan, the 6 orthodox scriptures in Hindu philosophy that are inspired by the sages. Of these, we all know of or at least may have heard of the Yoga Sutras of Maharishi Patanjali. This literature explored all the topics related to yoga and put in one manual. This has been responsible for the spreading of the practice of yoga into the Western world or the world over. For example, this mantra says, Yam Niyam Asan Pranayam Pratyahara Dharana Dhyan Samadhyo Shtavangani. This is Sutra 29 of the 2nd chapter of Yoga Sutras of Maharishi Patanjali. This explains Ashtanga Yoga, or what we call the 8 limbs of yoga, in just one sutra. This can take many, many hours to explain because every step, like Yam for example, has subcategories of many steps, and then each step has subcategories and so on. So as you can see, the sutras reconcile information on one topic from all parts of the Veda into one place for the benefit of mankind. And as we may know, the other 5 darshans are Mimamsa, written by Maharishi Jaimini. This describes the ritualistic duties and ceremonies, or what we call Vedic rituals. The other one is Vedanta Darshan. This is also very popular, written by Maharishi Vedvyas. This discusses the nature of God and the importance of spiritual knowledge. Then comes the Nyaya Darshan by Maharishi Gautam, and this sutra develops a system of logic for understanding life. Vaisheshik Darshan by Maharishi Kanad. This analyzes creation And then the sixth one is Sankhya Darshan by Maharishi Kapil. And this one describes the evolution of the universe. In addition to the Shara Darshan, there are also the Dharmasutras, which provide all information pertaining with the duties of individuals as per our prescribed dharma. There are the Griha Sutras, which describe our family responsibilities and life as householders. It is also important to note that while the words of these sutras belong to the authors, the contents of these sutras are derived from and conform to the Vedas. So far we have talked about the Shruti, that which is heard. However, in our scriptures, we also have what is called Smriti, that which is remembered from the root verb smar, to remember. Another name for this category is Smriti Grantha, or remembered wisdom. These are composed from studies of the Vedas, of course, and by the gathering and the reconciliation of information and presenting it in an elaborate and understandable form, again, these are for the benefit of the humankind. A popular one amongst the Smritis is Manusmriti, which explains the duties of living beings in creation, etc. In other words, whatever was implicit or implied in the sutras, the Smritis made them explicit by elaborating these hidden ideas and bringing them to life. Then comes the ones we know even better, the Puranas. The Puranas are said to be ancient but never lost their relevance, as is explained by the word Pura, which means very ancient, and Navaha, which means fresh, ever fresh, even in this century. So the Puranas clarify and rearrange topics and abstract ideas from the Vedas and present these in a form of stories, or shall we say, the personification of ideas. For example, Vedas say, Satyam Vada means speak the truth. This is in Chandogya Upanishad. Here, Vedvyas tells a real story. Just by looking at Satyam Vada, tells a story to elaborate on this important point found in the Ved. One that explains in great detail of a person tossed in one difficult situation after another, but stuck to the truth at the expense of everything and anything. It is a popular story of Raja Harishchandra in Markandeya Purana and so many other Purans. This we can discuss another time. It's a, like I said, elaborate story. So for information's sake, we see that the Puranas are a personification of Vedic ideas in story form. Modern science teaches us the art, the power, and the benefits of storytelling today. Many impactful motivational speakers today would like to call themselves, or do call themselves, storytellers. Yet Ved Vyasji knew this science 5,000 years ago and put the Puranas into story form. So moving along, we then have what is called Itihas. Iti-ha-sa means it so happened, which literally means history. So the word Itihas means history. So these are the Itihas, or history-based scriptures in the form of poetic literature, namely the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The Ramayana, which contains 24,000 verses, and Mahabharata, that contains 100,000 verses. You may have observed that in the Western world, these Itihas scriptures are called epics in English language. Epics are compared to the epics in the Western world, such as the Iliad of Homer and the Odyssey, which, by the way, are both based on secular themes. So it is important to note that the Mahabharata, which is listed as the top 10 greatest epics of all time by Western organizations, is 10 times approximately larger than both the Iliad and the Odyssey put together. But more importantly, it is based on spirituality and devotion, as against secular themes. However, some people say that they accept only Ved and Upanishads, but not the Puranas and the Itihas, because these scriptures came later. However, we have learned by now that they're all in alignment with authentic Vedic knowledge. Why do I say that? Because Ved tells us, Itihasa Puranam Panchamam Vedanam Veda. This is Chandogya Upanishad, Ved 7:12. What it means? Know the Itihas and the Puranas to be what? Panchamam Vedanam Veda. Know the Itihas and Puran to be the fifth Ved. And by reading these, it helps us to clarify the meaning of the Ved. Let's also briefly address the Gita. Bhagavad Gita can be found in Mahabharata. Mahabharata is known as Itihas. In Mahabharata, in the Bhishma Parva, chapters 25 to 42, Bhagavad Gita can be found. But the Bhagavad Gita itself is not Itihas per se, because it is also called Gita Shastra and Gita Upanishad. Why? Because it encapsulates the most important aspects of it. Even when Sri Krishna spoke in Gita, this is called Bhagavan Vachan. It is Bhagavan himself speaking, and everything he's saying in the Gita verses conform to Veda, because Bhagavan Vachan means Bhagavan himself is saying. And so Bhagavan would not violate the words of the Veda. To substantiate for this, let us look at Gita Mahatmya from Padma Puran. A very popular verse, most people know this. Sarvo Upanishado Gavo Dogda Gopalanandana Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahat. Sarva Upanishado Gavo, all the Upanishads are like a cow. Dogda Gopalanandana, and the milker Dogda of that cow is Krishna, the son of Nanda. So Bhagavan is saying here clearly that the Upanishads are the cow and he's just the milker. He's also saying the milker Krishna is echoing Vedic philosophy in the form of Bhagavad Gita. Partho Vatsa, Arjuna is the calf, and the nectar of the Gita is the milk. It says that men of purified intellect, Sudhir Bhokta, are the drinkers and enjoyers of that milk. Even in the West, American 19th century poet Thoreau says about Bhagavad Gita that in the morning I bathe my intellect in the stupendous philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. In addition to those scriptures, there is what is called Bhashyam, which are commentaries or theses on all the above scriptures, of course written by saints or God-realized souls. Again, the words of the saints are in line with the Veda, and reading them helps clarify the meaning of the Veda. So having reviewed the various types of scriptural literature that forms the spiritual foundation of Hinduism, the question is asked if these scriptures contradict each other in any way. Let's look at one comparison amongst the many scriptures to find out. Veda has 3 kans and talks about 3 pathways to God, or to God realization. Kand Tayatmako Veda. Karm Kand, Gyan Kand, Bhakti Kand. For information's sake, 80,000 mantras of Veda dedicated to Karma, 16,000 mantras to Upasana Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, and then 4,000 to Tattva, or what is called Gyan. The same 3 pathways are mentioned in almost all the other scriptures. For example, Jnana Karma Cha Bhaktischa Nopayonyosti Kutrachit. This is Bhagavad in the 11th canto, the 20th chapter, the 6th verse. Sri Krishna is saying here to Uddhava that because I desire that all devotees, all human beings, to achieve perfection, I have provided 3 paths for them to advance. The path of knowledge, the path of karma, and the path of devotion or bhakti. Same thing. Bhagavad Gita, as we know, offer these same 3 paths from chapters 1 to 6, Karma Yoga from 7 to 12, Bhakti Yoga from chapters 13 to 18, the path of knowledge or Gyan. Further proof of this is also in Manu Smriti. Manu Smriti says, Bhutan Bhavyam Bhavishyam Cha Sarvam Vedat Prasiddhati, 1297 of Manu Smriti. This is important. A spiritual principle is only acceptable if it is in conformity with the Veda. Of course, it is not accepted as an orthodox treatise in Hinduism if it is not in concurrence with Vedic philosophy. Here we can see that the various scriptures do not contradict each other, but rather they elaborate the same points in different formats. The greatness of the scriptures of Sanatana Dharma is well known and highly regarded by Western greats as well. Paul Deussen, the famous 19th century German Indologist, has said that when we read the philosophical monuments of India, we find in them many truths so profound and so elevating, in contrast to the level at which European philosophy has stopped, that we are constrained to bend our knees before the philosophy of India. In other words, to bow to the great philosophy of Sanatana Dharma, is what Paul Dawson is saying. So in conclusion, we have learned that the Vedas, which originated from the breath of God, Nishrusitamasya Vedaha, is the original and foremost scripture. The Ved is then divided into four major components, namely Rig, Yajur, Sham, Atharva Ved. Then there are Vedangas, which are associated scriptures that are composed to help in the understanding of the structure of the Ved. These are followed, of course, by the Upavedas, which contain material knowledge that are pertinent to implementing spiritual knowledge in our lives. Then comes the Upanishads, like we discussed, which focus on the various knowledge sections of the Vedas, and there are 108 Upanishads in total. Then from that comes the Sutras, which are encapsulated formats of specific topics from the Vedas, of course. Then you have the Smriti, that which is remembered. These further expand on the knowledge of the Ved into applicable ways of life. Then comes the Puranas, which are ideas and topics of Vedas in story form for better acknowledgement and understanding of knowledge that we can inculcate in our lives. Then, of course, we have the Itihas, which are documented history and poetic literature from Vedic teachings. We know the names of Itihas, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Then we talked about Bhagavad Gita, which stands on its own as a Shastra. It is called Gita Shastra or Gita Upanishad. Why? Because it encapsulates the most important aspects of Ved and was spoken by Bhagavan himself. And finally, we have Bhashyam, which are commentaries by saints, by God-realized souls. And these aid in the modern day in understanding of the Ved. So here, we can see after this brief review of our scriptures that Hinduism has one primary scripture, and that is the Ved. Every other scripture that followed are derivatives of Ved due to the magnanimous structure of the Ved in order to classify this most valuable knowledge into various formats to aid reconciliation, to aid understanding, for analysis and dissemination of such knowledge, so us as mankind can benefit from the pure science of the Ved. It is my hope that in bringing you this information today, that we're able to remove some confusion, if any, in regards to Hinduism and understand the source and authenticity of our gamut of scriptures. As such, we'll be able to place paramount importance in finding ways to incorporate and to implement these teachings derived from this expanse of knowledge into our daily lives and pass this on to our future generations. So the fundamentals of Hinduism and all that it stands for can continue to make a difference in the lives of many for centuries to come. Bar 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 mango, harshdeha shriram, parsaro jayan pavani, bhakti sada satsang, bol ram, bol ram, bol ram, bol ram, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Radhe Shyam, Umapati Mahadev ki jai, Pavan Sut Hanuman ki jai, Siyavar Ramchandra ki jai, Sharanam Prabhu, Sab Santan ki jai jai, Sita Ram, Jai Shri Radhe, Vrindavan Bihari Lal ki jai.